My name is Sherry. I'm 63. And for 5 years, I've been the widow of a man who repaired clocks and talked with his hands when he got excited. I live in a single-story brick house on a street with sycamores that litter the sidewalk in the fall. And I sweep myself, because sweeping clears my head. My routine is simple. An early walk to the bakery, watering the herbs in the window, checking the electric bill with a yellow pencil I keep in the kitchen drawer. Every Sunday night, my daughter Wren and son-in-law Wade come over for dinner. Mac and cheese with breadcrumbs and apple salad. And I lay out the plaid tablecloth that Harold, my husband, preferred. This constancy has become my haven. It's when I feel part of something bigger than my silent house. That month, I was proud of myself for having downsized my TV package and renegotiated my car insurance, things you'd expect from someone who'd learned to do math in real life. I write everything down in a blue notebook with the date, time, and mood of the day, a habit I started during my grief and never abandoned. This is how I organize my world. Paper, pen, and the sound of the kettle reminding me there's still water to boil. I was, and still am, lucid, independent, and stubborn like a glass lid that doesn't easily open. That Tuesday, I left the house around 3:30 to buy yeast because Sunday's cake needed a decent rise. The sky was the color of an old t-shirt, and I was wearing flip-flops, a cloth bag, and a list written in my... I like to see my handwriting guiding me. I reached the corner and felt something strange, an absence, a pocket that was too light. I reached my bag and understood. My wallet had been left in the living room drawer, where I also keep the Polaroid photos of my still unborn grandson. I murmured an affectionate, "Oh, Sherry," turned on my heel and walked back, laughing at myself, because forgetting my wallet is the kind of human folly I always forgive. The gate creaked as always, accomplice to my ordinary life. I walked through the garden, already wondering if I had time to make the cake that day or if I should wait until tomorrow. I had the key in my hand when I heard muffled voices coming from the living room, like a radio playing another show. My name appeared, clear as a pot lid banging against the sink. I stopped with my hand in the air, between the key and the lock, and walked sideways to the half-open window. Wren's voice came first, in the tone she uses when organizing closets, objective, clipped. "If she keeps forgetting things, it'll be easier to prove," she said. And I almost replied, "Forgetting your wallet isn't a disease, it's a distraction." But I bit my tongue. Wade, always smelling of citrus cologne, answered too quietly. So I leaned into the crack and felt the cool wood on my face. He said, "The redirection form went through, the bank letters are already going in the box," like someone celebrating a goal in a neighborhood game. I felt a chill run through my scalp, like water seeping through the collar of a sweater in winter. Wren added, "Dr. L is in agreement. With 3 inconsistent evaluations, the emergency guardianship will be granted without a fuss." Someone shuffled papers. I recognized the scrape of my own plastic folder, that blue one that only I have. "And the POA?" he asked, and she said, "I already filled it out. All that's missing is the signature. She just needs to be tired enough on Sunday." The world shrank to the door. That window and my living room, which I decorated myself with a tape measure and patience, became the setting for a play that wasn't meant for me. I backed away slowly, like someone taking their hand out of the oven without dropping the pan, and sat on the porch step to listen to my own heartbeat. My first impulse was to scream in, to break the spell with my voice, like a mother who's saved a cat from a roof and clothes from the rain. My second was to call the police, but I still didn't have the entire photograph, just the negatives. I remembered my blue notebook and Harold saying, proof is a regulated clock. If it's fast or slow, someone fixed it wrong. I breathed, counting to 6 like I do when anxiety opens drawers I don't need to open. The word guardianship entered my mouth with a taste of iron, a memory of seeing a neighbor lose her signature because of a hasty relative. I looked at the street, at the plane trees leaving map-shaped stains on the cement, and decided I wasn't going to be a map that others crossed without reading the caption. I got up, adjusted my bag strap, and went to the house of my neighbor, Mrs. Baines, from 42nd Street, to get a glass of water and use the kitchen phone with the pumpkin-shaped refrigerator magnet. I called the office of Paul, the lawyer who took out my homeowner's insurance, and left a 2-sentence message. "It's Sherry. I need you today." When Paul returned, his voice had the calm of someone who knows that a signed document isn't the same as the truth. I told him what I'd heard completely, without any seasoning, and he asked me to stay home, to remain as predictable as a wall calendar. "We'll need a chronology, Sherry, and evidence that doesn't rely solely on your memory," he said, and I smirked, because my memory is a fair record, but I know the court likes etiquette. He mentioned Detective Santos from the department that handles elder financial abuse, and that I should, if possible, record conversations in which they incriminated themselves. Real life, word for word, he emphasized. I thought about the checkered tablecloth, the cake I didn't buy, and how Sundays are the river my family sails on. "I can do it," I replied, and it was true the second I spoke. "And, Sherry," he added, "don't confront me yet. Let us set the right table." I hung up with a plan coming together like a loaf of bread. Slow, controlled, with time on our side. Santos showed up late in the afternoon in a patrol car, her hair tied back, eyes like someone who's seen too many stories seem like love and turn into bills to pay. She sat with me in Mrs. Baines's kitchen, ordered coffee brewed in a percolator, and pulled a recorder that looked like a car keychain from her purse. "You put this in your apron pocket and this one near the phone," she explained matter-of-factly, as she jotted down my account with a gel pen that made a comfortable sound on the paper. She asked me to keep a logbook with the date, time, and who said what, and to also note down what I felt. "Emotion helps you remember context," she said, and I treasured that phrase like a lucky coin. Together, we created 3 fronts, shielding my bank with security flags, notifying the notary of any attempts to register powers of attorney in my name, and scheduling an appointment with Dr. L, but on a day and time when Santos could work. I nodded, repeating the steps quietly, like a new prescription. Santos looked at me and said, "You're not a supporting character." I laughed, wringing out the dishcloth. I never was. I returned home when the night already smelled of wet grass, and opened the door like someone returning from a normal stroll. The living room was tidy. My letter holder in the entryway looked innocent, and the photograph of Wren as a child stared at me from the bookshelf, her round cheeks kissed 1,000 times. I put water on to boil, washed the prettiest apple, and sat down with the blue notebook to reconstruct the day, word for word. I wrote, "I forgot my wallet at 3:37 p.m. and felt the weight of the sentence. My forgetfulness became proof that God writes in crooked lines and gave me a second chance to see what I otherwise wouldn't. I checked my folders, taxes, bills, essential documents, all in place. But now I knew there was a misplaced place, a mailbox where my statements were read by other hands. I opened the odds and ends drawer and chose an apron with a deep pocket to hide my keychain recorder on Sunday. I took the checkered tablecloth and ironed it with a warm iron, like someone sharpening a knife before cutting. And I smiled, because there's no theater more convincing than truth with a touch of acting. In the days leading up to Sunday, I practiced slight lapses in front of the mirror, studying the timing of the pauses like someone memorizing old music. One afternoon, I pretended to look for my glasses while they were on top of my head and timed how long it took to look natural. Another, I let the pot of water boil an extra minute so the hissing would distract me at the right time without any real danger. I called the bank and set up the flags with the manager, a woman who calls everyone aunt, and treated me like a partner in the investigation. We agreed on passwords and a code phrase. The cake didn't rise. I stopped at the grocery store and bought the same cheese as always, so Ren and Wade would find a familiar setting and feel like they owned the E's narrative. That night, I prayed for what I would lose and what I would gain, knowing that sometimes justice hurts like stretching a stiff leg. I scheduled my appointment with Dr. L for Tuesday at 9 a.m. and texted Santos with a kettle emoji and the word ready. And I was ready, like someone who's learned to wait for the sugar to set before pouring it into the mold. I felt Sunday dawn with a heavy air, as if the clouds also knew something was brewing inside my house. I woke early, washed my face with cold water, and calmly looked at myself in the mirror. I practiced a somewhat lost expression, fixed my hair, and purposefully left my blouse a little wrinkled, a small but calculated detail. At breakfast, I wrote in my blue notebook, "Today is the first act." The smell of coffee wafted through the kitchen, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a mere comfort, it was ammunition. I was about to sit at the same table that had so often served as a noose, but this time it would be a stage. When Ren and Wade arrived, the doorbell rang with that metallic tone that always reminds me of a church bell. I opened the door with a smile, but inside, my hands were as cold as river stones. Ren entered first, carrying flowers from the market, the gesture she repeats every Sunday like someone fulfilling a ritual. Wade followed, his posture too straight, as if carrying a secret inside his suit that kept him rigid. I pretended to trip on the carpet, blurted out, "Where did I put my apron?" and saw the quick glint of complicity in their eyes. They believed the curtain was already rising on their play. While I was preparing the salad, I left the tape recorder hidden in my apron pocket on. I pretended to forget the salt, then returned to the wrong drawer twice in a row. Ren, ever impatient, looked at Wade with a half smile, as if marking time. That's when she brought a thin yellow folder to the table, its flap already worn. She placed it beside the plate as if it were merely a casual detail, but my eyes recognized the weight contained within, prepared papers waiting to be pressed. The smell of gratin cheese filled the kitchen, but to me, it tasted like gunpowder. "It's getting hard for you, Mom, isn't it?" Ren said, his voice too sweet, smeared with fake honey. I rested my hands on the table and pretended to hesitate before replying. "Sometimes. I really do forget, sweetheart. Must be my age." I felt Wade lean in, his elbow propped confidently, and reply, "That's why we've already prepared a few things. Just to help, you know? Make sure everything's in order." He pulled a white envelope from inside his jacket. My legs trembled inside, but outwardly I just forced a distracted smile, like someone who didn't fully understand. Ren opened the folder and showed me a document with my name at the top. "Just sign here, Mom. It's a simple power of attorney, nothing complicated. Paul himself would recommend it if he were sensible. Before things get worse was the phrase that kept hitting me like a hammer on an anvil. I paused for a long time, exaggerating my doubt and staring blankly at the checkered tablecloth. "Sign what, exactly? You know I trust you." The words came out measured, tinged with the fragility they expected. Wade stepped forward and placed a pen in front of me, as if his haste were a sign of affection. The silent recorder in my pocket recorded every detail, the tone of his voice, the brush of the pen on the table, his anxious breathing. "It's only for your own good," he insisted, using the formal tone he never used with me, almost as if he were already treating me like a hospice patient. Ren nodded urgently, his eyes sparkling with anticipation. It was as if they both already tasted victory. I took a deep breath and dropped my salad spoon to the floor, bending down with theatrical difficulty to pick it up. I gained precious seconds to control my heart and plan my next move. When I looked up, again, I let out a hollow laugh, the kind that hides discomfort. It's all happening so fast, isn't it? So confusing. I glanced at the open folder, betraying fear, but inside my chest vibrated with the certainty that their every word was now living proof. Dinner proceeded with tension disguised as routine. The food was almost flavorless. Each bite seemed merely a pause between rehearsed questions and calculated answers. When dessert arrived, Wade couldn't resist. He pulled out this
more
time
papers.
an addendum to a will. Ren held my arm supportively, but his grip was tight enough to betray his haste. I smiled shakily, nodded, and said, "Maybe after the doctor's appointment. After the appointment on Tuesday, okay?" They looked at each other, satisfied, unaware that their own trap had already been set for them. That Sunday night, when I closed the door behind them, I leaned against the wood for a few minutes, listening only to the ticking of the wall clock. The house seemed quieter than ever, as if it had retained the echo of the words spoken at the table. I opened the blue notebook and wrote in a firm hand, "They believe they've already won." Then, at the bottom, I added, "But Tuesday will be the day of change." I slept little, my heart beating fast, but also with the strange serenity of someone who knows they have hidden cards up their sleeve. On Monday, the day dragged on like a bank line. I spent the morning retesting the recorder, checking the batteries, adjusting the coat pocket where I'd hide it. I called Santos, who responded with that comforting directness. "Everything's in order. They don't know you have us by your side." I spent the afternoon making a simple cake, not for the pleasure of it, but to occupy my hands and calm my thoughts. As I kneaded the batter, I remembered Harold's words, "He who moves his own destiny is he who holds the spoon." On Tuesday, I woke before the sun. The sky was still gray and I had already dressed modestly, my hair tied back carelessly to reinforce my image of fragility. At 8:30, I heard the short honk at the gate. I looked out the window and saw their car with an overnight bag in the trunk. My stomach churned, material proof that they intended to commit me directly. I grabbed my bag, closed the front door slowly, and took a deep breath. "Today ends," I muttered to myself. On the way to Dr. L's clinic, Wade spoke quietly to Ren, but I heard the words easy, easy, and finally believed they were one step away from complete control. I, with my hands resting in my lap, feigned distraction, staring out the window at the trees running backward. Inside, however, I was in turmoil, fear that something would go wrong, but also the flame of resistance that kept me upright. As we entered the clinic's reception area, the smell of disinfectant and damp paper hit me. The secretary smiled mechanically, asking them to fill out a form. Ren took the lead, filling it out quickly as if he'd already rehearsed it. Wade held my elbow, too firmly to be affectionate. I trembled inside, but only a vague hesitation showed, as if I didn't quite understand where I was. Then, suddenly, the side door opened. 2 uniformed officers entered, followed by Detective Santos and Paul, the attorney. Time seemed to stand still. Wade let go of my arm. Ren froze, pen in hand. Santos's firm voice cut through the air. "Mr. Wade, Ms. Ren, you are under arrest for elder abuse, the overnight bag was opened right there in front of everyone, revealing extra papers, loose pills, and mail receipts. Ren tried to stammer an excuse, but the handcuffs were already on his wrists. Wade, red as a blaze, tried to say it was a misunderstanding, but the officer read aloud, evidence of misdirected mail, false powers of attorney, and altered account records. The ground they'd thought solid gave way in seconds. I remained seated, my body seemingly fragile, but inside an avalanche of strength held me up. As they were being led away, Dr. L appeared in the hallway, her face pale as if she knew the game was over for her too. Santos looked at her and said the investigation would continue, including medical collusion. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air of victory rush through my chest. In that office where they planned my demise, I regained not only my autonomy, but also the certainty that they would never again underestimate the lucidity of a 63-year-old woman. I left the clinic accompanied by Paul and Detective Santos, and the mid-morning sun seemed brighter than it had been in years. I walked slowly but firmly, feeling like every movement was a silent declaration. I'm still my own person. Paul held a folder with copies of the evidence and assured me that the case would be solid, impossible to reverse. You not only protected yourself, Sherry, but set a precedent for many similar cases. I smiled wearily and replied, then may my pain not have been in vain. That same afternoon, I returned home. I opened the door with the key I'd so often feared losing, and for the first time, I felt that home was mine again, free from invisible hands trying to uproot me. I walked down the hallway, touching the walls, as if greeting old friends. The silence was now an ally, not an enemy. I made chamomile tea, sat in Harold's favorite chair, and let the tears fall, not of weakness but of relief. It was like washing the soul after a storm. In the following days, the neighborhood began to talk. Some whispered about the arrest, others looked at me with pitying eyes. But Mrs. Baines, from 42, knocked on my door with a lemon cake and said, "You were braver than all of us put together." I hugged her like someone holding on to a piece of solid ground. Deep down, I knew being a victim of someone you love is a wound that doesn't heal easily, but surviving it is also an invisible crown. At the bank, I was welcomed like a special client. The manager, who called me Auntie, took me to a private room, and together we updated passwords, blocked access, and created new layers of security. We adopted the code phrase, "Sunday cake," to validate any transaction. When I finished signing the papers, she said, "Now you're the only one in charge." And I felt a deep peace, as if each signature were a lit candle driving away the darkness. I also made a decision. I redid my will. With Paul's help, I included clauses preventing any legal guardian from also being a beneficiary. I set up an anti-abuse trust, ensuring that if I ever need care, it will be paid without any diversion. It was bureaucracy upon bureaucracy, but each signed page was like building bricks around my dignity. "It's not paranoia, Sherry," Paul said. "It's wisdom." And in the midst of this process, something blossomed within me. I understood that protecting myself wasn't enough. I wanted to protect others too. I accepted an invitation from a local NGO to give talks on financial education for seniors. The first time I stood on a small community stage, my hands were shaking, but my voice came through clearly. Never submit your signature without understanding. Never let love blind your eyes to greed. I saw heads shaking, eyes welling up, and I realized that my story had become a weapon against the silence. A letter from Ren arrived weeks later. The envelope was white, the handwriting still the same as the notes he'd left me at school. Inside, a plea for forgiveness filled with excuses. We were under pressure. It wasn't really like that. We just wanted to help. I read it to the end, folded it slowly, and put it in a wooden box. I I didn't reply. I learned that forgiveness isn't synonymous with coexistence, and that reopening the door to those who tried to erase me would be a betrayal of myself. I redefined the concept of family. For me now, family is those who care without asking for anything in return, those
and
who
celebrate
respect my
my
autonomy.
limits.
I found this family in my neighbors, my NGO colleagues, even in the strangers who came to thank me after a talk. I discovered that blood can betray, but true bonds are built through daily choices. And above all, I discovered that even at 63, it's possible to be reborn stronger than ever. On the nights after lectures, I would return home and turn on only a corner lamp, leaving the rest of the room plunged into darkness. There, alone, I faced my daughter's absence. No matter how much I had won, victory didn't erase the scar. Ren was still the baby I'd rocked through fevers, the girl who'd cried out for help during math tests. Closing the door on her hurt like tearing a piece of myself away. But I quietly repeated, "This isn't about revenge, Sherry. It's about survival." And that mantra kept me going. I began writing letters to myself, letters of remembrance, of comfort, of recognition. In one of them, I wrote, "You are no less of a mother for saying no. You are more of a woman for protecting yourself." I kept these letters in my blue notebook, now transformed into a living testament to my journey. Each page was proof that I had not succumbed to their narrative, that my lucidity was my most precious weapon. One morning, Detective Santos called me. She said the case was being used in training for new investigators, as an example of how elderly people can be targets of sophisticated scams. "You've become a role model, Sherry," she said, and I smiled, with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Who would have thought that the widow who only wanted to cook for her daughter on Sundays would become a symbol of legal resistance? A local reporter also showed up, asking for an interview. I hesitated but accepted. I told my story without embellishment, without hiding my pain. The article ran with the headline, "She feigned fragility to prove strength." When I saw my photo in the paper, clutching the blue notebook to my chest, I cried again. But this time, they were tears of liberation. I was writing a new version of myself in front of the entire city. Little by little, I forged a network of unexpected friendships. Elderly people came to me seeking guidance, people carrying folders of tangled documents and eyes filled with fear. I listened to them patiently and said, "Start with your notebook. Write everything down. Paper is a shield." Seeing hope blossom on their faces was like planting a garden in soil that seemed dry. I never stopped, missing Ren's laughter, but I learned to fill the void. On Sundays, when the doorbell didn't ring, I cooked anyway, inviting neighbors or NGO colleagues. The chess table, once the scene of conspiracy, became a welcoming space. Fresh laughter echoed where venom once lurked. I discovered that life still had spice, still had a golden crust of mac and cheese to offer. One afternoon, Paul came to visit me. He brought flowers and said, "You've rewritten the manual, Sherry. You've gained legal
sovereignty."
And I laughed, placing the flowers in the vase and replying, "Sovereignty is a beautiful name for something simple, owning your own story." He agreed, and we toasted with tea, as if it were champagne. It was a celebration of what I had regained, and deep down, I understood. What saved me wasn't just the law, nor just cunning. It was the lucidity of never doubting myself, even when others tried to convince me otherwise. It was the courage to feign fragility to prove strength. It was the stubbornness of someone who sweeps leaves from the sidewalk every day and knows that, no matter how many times they fall again, there will always be someone who insists on cleaning the floor. I began traveling around the city to give short talks at community centers and churches. They were simple places, often with plastic chairs lined up and the smell of freshly brewed coffee. At first I trembled a little as I held the microphone, but soon my voice steadied as I remembered why I was there. I told my story in real detail, the window, the whisper, the overnight bag, and saw in people's eyes the reflection of the same fear I had felt. It was as if each word I spoke was also a key, opening doors of courage for those who listened. A man named Dalton approached me after one of these lectures. He showed me overdue bills and bank letters that had mysteriously disappeared. "My nephew takes care of everything for me," he said, trying to sound confident. I held his hands and asked, "And who takes care of you?" The question hung in the air, and he wept silently. Days later, he called me to thank me. He had discovered strange activity in his account and managed to block it in time. That's when I realized my personal struggle was transforming into a chain of collective protection. I also met Lydia, a 70-year-old woman, who quietly told me that her daughter made her sign papers without explaining. "They say it's for the family's good," she murmured. I gave her a brand new blue notebook, just like mine, and said, "Write down everything, even the seemingly small things. The details save the day." Months later, I received a letter from her, thanking me for the diary that served as evidence against her own daughter, who was trying to take her house. Reading it, I felt both weight and lightness. It wasn't just my life that had changed. It was lives I never imagined I would reach. Over time, the NGO invited me to participate in the creation of a regular program, financial, education and rights workshops for seniors. We named the project Blue Shield in honor of my notebook. The symbol was simple, an open hand holding a book. With each meeting, more stories were added to mine. Seniors who arrived with their heads down left with firmer steps, as if rediscovering that they can still write their own story. I felt rejuvenated, as if I'd found a new purpose at 63. But at night, when I turned out the lights, loneliness still whispered. There were moments when I almost picked up Ren's letter again, almost wrote a reply. Blood is a stubborn bond. But each time the urge arose, I remembered the metallic sound of the handcuffs closing, the overnight bag, her voice saying, "Before it gets worse." Then I put the letter back in the wooden box and reaffirmed my decision, not to open the door again. Love cannot be a bargaining chip for the loss of dignity. One Sunday, I decided to keep the dinner tradition going. I made mac and cheese, spread the checkered tablecloth, and invited neighbors and 2 colleagues from the NGO. The table, which had previously carried the shadow of manipulation, now overflowed with sincere laughter and lively conversation. When I saw one of the guests offer seconds and thank him, my eyes welled up. It was as if Harold were there too, smiling in the corner of the room, telling me I had restored meaning to the ritual. That dinner was a rebirth. It didn't take long for the national media to discover the Sherry case. Reporters sought me out. Psychologists cited my story in articles about autonomy in old age. I was even invited to a morning TV show, and I accepted. In the studio, with the lights bright and cameras trained, I recounted my story. When I finished, the host took my hand and said, "You are living proof that there's no age limit to turning the tables." The audience applauded, and I felt an immense warmth course through my body. It was recognition not only of my pain, but of my resilience. After that program, I received dozens of letters and messages. People from different cities, even from other states, shared their own struggles. Siblings, nephews, grandchildren trying to take what wasn't theirs. Each letter was a mirror showing that my case was just the tip of a silent iceberg. I responded to them all calmly, using the same phrase that had already become my motto: lucidity, proof, and allies. That is the shield. With this visibility, my life took on a rhythm I never imagined at 63. I received invitations to speak at universities, at conferences on aging, even at legal events. At first, I found that world of auditoriums and microphones strange, but then I realized my voice carried more than a story. It carried a collective warning. I would say, looking firmly into packed audiences, danger doesn't always come from outside. Often it dresses in the clothing of care and speaks with the voice of love. At those times, the silence in the room was so profound that you could even hear a
Being
bag.
zipped.
Despite this, I kept my essence simple. I continued sweeping the sidewalk, watering my plants, and writing everything down in my blue notebook. It was this notebook that reminded me of who I was before and after the storm. When asked to show my memory tricks, I would respond humorously. The trick is to never let others tell you what you remember or don't remember. The memory is yours. Keep it safe. And the audience laughed, but left reflecting. I discovered that teaching
Also
can be a way of healing. Still, there were days of emptiness. One Saturday, I saw mothers and daughters strolling together in the market, and I felt a pang like a dull knife. At those times, I would go to the wooden box, take out Ren's letter, and just stare at the sealed envelope. I didn't read it again, but I didn't throw it away either. It was a reminder that I was still human, still wounded. I learned to live with this duality, being strong in public, but accepting my vulnerability in silence. One day, the NGO organized a meeting with young law students. They wanted to understand how a guardianship scam worked in practice. I explained every detail, including how they had staged my supposed forgetfulness. The students were shocked, taking notes frantically. At the end, one young woman told me, "I want to be a lawyer to protect people like you." That deeply moved me because I realized that my struggle was already planting seeds for future generations. Little by little, I also began rebuilding my emotional routines. I revived the habit of walking in the park on Sunday mornings, a habit I had abandoned during my grief. The cool wind on my face, the smell of damp earth, the sound of children running, all of this reminded me that the world was moving on, and so was I. Sometimes, I even encountered neighbors who would ask me for quick advice. "Sherry, how do I know if I should sign this contract?" I would smile and say, "If you don't understand every line, the answer is no." On one of these walks, I ran into Dalton, the man I'd helped months ago. He wore a straw hat and a smile that couldn't be contained on his face. "Sherry, I bought a new radio with the money my nephew almost stole. Now I listen to music every day." We laughed together, and I felt genuine joy. It was like reaping the fruits of a tree I'd unknowingly planted. Every life saved was also a reparation for the pain I'd suffered. The following winter, I received an unexpected invitation to speak at a national conference on active aging. The stage was large, the lights intense, but when I took the microphone, I felt only the warmth of my purpose. I recounted my entire journey, from forgetting my wallet to Ren and Wade's arrest. When I finished, the audience stood to applaud. Some wept. I took a deep breath and said, "Never underestimate a lucid senior. We are stronger than you think." After that event, I began to be sought out, not only by the elderly, but also by entire families who wanted to learn how to protect their parents and grandparents. This change filled me with hope. It was as if finally my pain had become a bridge, connecting generations. I was no longer just Sherry, the 63-year-old widow deceived by her own. I was Sherry, the woman who proved that lucidity, proof, and allies are an unbreakable shield. Over time, I realized my story couldn't stop at just lectures. I proposed to the NGO that we create a practical manual for seniors with simple guidance on rights and care. I spent weeks reviewing each page, adding examples from my own life. It's not theory, it's survival, I wrote in the preface. When the manual was released, I received messages from people in cities I'd never visited, thanking me. It was as if my voice traveled on paper, crossing invisible borders. One of my most memorable experiences took place in a nursing home. I was invited to speak to the residents, many of whom were already frail. I entered the room and saw dozens of attentive eyes, some in wheelchairs, others with canes. I recounted how I was nearly taken to a nursing home against my will. There was a thick silence until a woman raised her trembling hand and said, "Thank you for fighting for us." At that moment, I felt my testimony wasn't just about me, but about everyone whose voices were muffled. My home, once a scene of conspiracy, became a place for gatherings. I organized conversation circles in the living room with hot tea, cookies, and a space for. There, elderly people shared stories, laughed at memories, and cried in their hearts. Often, I just listened, jotting down phrases in my blue notebook that deserved to be remembered. I discovered that listening was as powerful as speaking. Each meeting ended with long hugs, as if we were all rebuilding chosen families. One night, I dreamed of Harold. He was sitting on the porch, repairing a clock, as he used to do. He looked at me and said, "You got the time right, Sherry." I woke with, but also with a smile. I interpreted the dream as confirmation. I had found my compass again. It wasn't just about justice, but about rediscovering harmony with life. In the midst of this rebirth, I received a visit from a group of journalism students. They wanted to film a documentary about my journey. I agreed, as long as they showed not only the climax of the case, but also what followed: the loneliness, the work, the reinvented dinners. When the documentary was released, I was moved to hear my own voice narrating excerpts. I saw on screen not a victim, but a survivor who chose to be a guide. Still, there were times when the pain of the breakup with Ren throbbed. On birthdays and special occasions, my heart ached. But I remembered the overnight bag, the forged signatures. I reaffirmed that it wasn't about pride, but self-preservation. Some wounds, I learned, need to heal silently, without the need for stitches. And that's okay. One day, I was surprised with a tribute. The City Hall presented me with a medal in recognition of my community service. I walked onto the stage with slow but steady steps and received applause from strangers who knew my story. I took the microphone and said, "The medal is beautiful, but my greatest victory is sleeping peacefully, knowing that no one can decide my life for me." The audience rose to their feet, and in that moment, I felt light, almost young again. With this recognition, I realized I had reached a final turning point. Had almost been reduced to a false diagnosis, was now a symbol of lucidity and resilience. I transformed betrayal into a tool, pain into a bridge, and fear into a beacon. Writing once more in the blue notebook, I noted, I wasn't just a survivor, I was a rewriter of my own story. As the months passed, solitude transformed into a different companion, myself. I discovered that I enjoyed the silence of the morning, the sound of the kettle whistling, the wind blowing through the window. I began talking to myself out loud, not for lack of people, but for the pleasure of hearing my own ideas. "Sherry, you did it," I'd say, and it was like receiving an intimate hug that didn't require arms. I began writing short chronicles inspired by my blue notebook. Stories of neighbors, of elderly people I knew, of memories from my youth. Some were published in local newspapers, others were kept just for me. I realized that turning memories into words was also a way to remain protected. No one can steal what has already been recorded and shared. It was like building paper walls around my life. One day, I received an unexpected call. A publisher wanted to turn my notes into a book. I was surprised, but I accepted. I worked with a young editor named Clara, who listened to me patiently and respectfully. The book was titled The Blue Notebook: How They Didn't Steal My Life. When I saw the finished cover, my hands trembled. I, a 63-year-old woman, was now a published author. I laughed in the kitchen, remembering Harold saying I always had too many stories to keep to myself. The impact was greater than I imagined. People stopped me on the street to thank me, asking for autographs of the book. Some said, "You saved my mother." Others, "After reading this, I'll never doubt my grandmother's lucidity again." Each testimony was another brick in the legacy I was building. I was no longer just the victim of an attempted family scam. I was a mentor, a guide, an inspiration. Despite this, I kept my feet on the ground. I continued cooking on Sundays, but now with tables full of friends, neighbors, and project colleagues. We laughed loudly, and I made a point of always preparing Harold's favorite dessert as if he were an invisible guest. On those nights, the void left by Ren still ached, but it no longer dominated me. Life had found new ways to fill the gaps. On my 64th birthday, I received a surprise. The law students who had learned about my story threw me a party. They decorated the room with blue balloons and gave me a cake with the words, "Lucidity is freedom." I cried like a child, hugging each of them. It was the best gift I've ever received because it showed that my struggle had become hope for others. Sometimes I still hear people ask if I regret not forgiving Ren. I calmly respond, forgiveness doesn't mean coexistence. I chose to live in peace. This phrase became a recurring theme in my lectures, and many women came to me afterward saying they also needed this reminder. I discovered that true freedom lies in knowing how to choose your limits. And so, between lectures, books, and meetings, I became not just Sherry, the woman who faced a coup. I became a symbol that no one, at any age, should accept being erased. My life didn't end at 63. On the contrary, it was there that a new chapter began, written with the ink of resistance and the paper of my inseparable blue notebook. Over time, I learned to measure my life not by what I lost, but by what I sowed. Sundays continued to be my meeting point with life, only now with new people who reminded me that family can be chosen. At the table, amid laughter and stories, I felt whole. The pain of betrayal still lingered, but it was no longer an open wound. It was a scar that reminded me of the strength I had to survive. One day, I sat on the porch at dusk, my blue notebook on my lap. The pages were worn from so much use, but each written word was a testament to my journey. I flipped through the first few pages and found the note about the day I forgot my wallet, that tiny detail that became the beginning of a whole new turnaround. I smiled at the thought that even forgetfulness can become salvation when lucidity guides one's steps. I received invitations to take the Blue Shield to other cities. I traveled by bus, carrying only a small suitcase and my notebook. In each place, I met elderly people who looked at me with hope and young people who saw me as an example. It was funny. I, who had almost been considered incapable, was now teaching about capacity. I realized that my legacy was not only in the pages of the book, but in the living impact I left wherever I went. On one of these trips, a girl of about 10 approached me at the end of the talk and said, "I want to be like you when I grow up, strong and smart." I bent down to her height, held her small hands and replied, "Always be the master of your story." It was one of the most moving moments of my life, because I saw the future being sown there. I still keep Ren's letter, and I know I perhaps always will. Not as a reminder of pain, but as a reminder that even love can be distorted by greed. My choice not to respond was, at its core, my most profound act of self-preservation. And I've learned to live at peace with that decision. After all, forgiving isn't forgetting. It's freeing yourself from the burden of carrying resentment. For my 65th birthday, I hosted a special dinner. The house was full, the table was set with a checkered tablecloth, and even a small band of neighbors came to play. Amidst the music and laughter, I closed my eyes for a moment and felt Harold beside me, as if approving of every choice I made. I opened my eyes and raised a toast to lucidity, which is our greatest freedom. Everyone applauded, and tears streamed down my face, this time of pure joy. When I returned to the balcony that night, the sky was clear and full of stars. I clutched the blue notebook to my chest and thought, I turned the attempt to erase me into light for others, and I realized that this was the true ending of my story, to be remembered not as a victim, but as a guardian, a woman who, at 63, decided to turn the tables and never again let anyone remove her from the position of author of her own life. Today, as I write these final lines, I know my journey doesn't end here. I continue teaching, listening, living. But if I could sum it all up in one sentence, it would be this. One has the right to steal the consciousness of someone who still breathes. Lucidity is my heritage, and the blue notebook is my testimony. And so, I close this account with the serenity of one who has won, not only in court, but within herself.